In this week's episode of The Hope Builders, I will speak with apologist and house church pastor Alex McElroy. We're going to talk about what were the lessons that they learned from COVID in the church in 2020 and what it means to make disciples in a house church in Chicago. Stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this.
Welcome to Hope Builders Ministries, advancing the gospel of Jesus Christ through the Great Commission. Learn about our work in Africa, Asia, and the United States, equipping, empowering, and encouraging Christians to become disciples of Christ who make disciples of Christ. Tune in for interviews with indigenous pastors in the countries where we serve, as well as U.S. Christians and pastors, as they talk about the work of equipping the saints to do the work of ministry. Visit www.hbmin.org. That's www.hbmin.org to learn more and download the Disciple Makers app. Now, let's get started.
Well, today I'm getting to speak with Pastor Alex McElroy, right? And we haven't spoken in a long time. In fact, I didn't even get a chance to speak to you in all of 2020, but we did connect via Facebook a few years ago, and you guys invited me out and our family to join you for church, and you guys do a house church as well. So how are things at the church?
Things are well. I always tell Nick, our main pastor, that you were just ahead of the curve, man, because we launched, and then a year or so later, everybody had a house church.
Yeah.
So it's been good. I think I'm sure we'll get into this, but the ability to maneuver is just a lot easier when you're smaller.
Yeah.
So we had to adjust like everyone, but not to the extent maybe.
Right. I want to connect with Nick at some point again. One of the things that I really liked about coming to the house and worshiping with you guys was you guys lived out disciple making. Like there was a young man, I think, staying with Nick at the time.
Yeah, he lives with him now.
He still lives. That is disciple making to the nth degree, right? It is not, you don't just meet somebody, introduce them to Jesus and walk away. You literally live with this person and help them grow. And I know you do apologetics. And so why don't you tell me a little bit about your ministry beyond the church? What's going on there? Because I think I saw a TED Talk a while back from you, right?
Yes, I did get to do a TED Talk in 2019, I believe.
Okay.
And that was out in Colorado Springs. It was a great experience. Nerve-wracking, but great. And as far as apologetics, for those that don't know what that is, basically it is, as an apologist, I'm somebody who teaches and speaks on evidence for the faith. So scientific, historical, archaeological, philosophical evidence for the faith, a lot of times specifically with our youth and young adults, because that's where we see the trend, unfortunately, where a lot of them walk away from the faith as they get to or through college. So my ministry is Proof for the Truth Ministries, excuse me, and we provide apologetics workshops that churches can host. So if you're interested, just go to proofforthetruth.org. And we're aware that most churches don't have an apologist on staff. It's just not realistic. Yeah. And so we just want to be a resource to you. And normally I'm traveling around the country. Hopefully that's coming back soon. But yeah, wherever you are, we'll try to get there.
Good.
Yes, please do. I actually just got off the phone with
So tell me a little bit about your background, because if I were to look at you outwardly, right, I'm like, wow, highly intelligent, young, charismatic, good-looking guy, can talk in front of thousands of people. Were you always this way? What's your faith story?
Not at all. I was a very shy kid, and be honest with you, I'm still an introvert. I know people don't believe it. People don't. If you only see me on a platform like this or on YouTube or live and on a stage or something, you won't know that.
Right.
But it's really that when I am able to talk about something I'm passionate about, that's almost the only time where I'm not an introvert. It's funny. I was coming back from an apologetics training, And I was riding in the car back to the airport with some people, one of whom was one of the presenters. And she was like, man, I can't wait to just get home and get in a book and not be in front of people. And it was only 30 of us because it was a small training. And then she was talking about how much of an introvert she is. And then before you know it, I was like, I'm an introvert too. And the whole car was. And all of us are public speakers to some degree.
Right.
But I think I've thought about this over some years, that this is God's genius, because if it wasn't that way, I've even heard Beyonce's an introvert, and you're like, how can 50,000 people come to her concert?
Yeah.
For me, if I was just this natural want to be seen, want to be on stage person, then I wouldn't know it's God doing it. When I step on the stage, I know God is taking over, because that's not me.
That's good.
And so it humbles you. It makes you put everything in the right perspective, where God gets the glory and not you. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about your background. I mean, how
Mhm.
did you come to faith? What's your testimony there?
So I actually came to faith fairly young. Now, as far as walking in that, that's a whole longer story. But I would say at probably around 10,
Okay.
I made a confession of faith, because my dad passed when I was 11, and I'm pretty sure I was saved before that happened. However, as we're going to discuss today, I didn't hear the word discipleship
Okay.
probably until I was 25.
Okay.
And I grew up in church. My mom took us to good Bible I remember kind of church hopping, but we weren't church hopping just to do it. Only thing I remember, she always kept saying, I want to find a good Bible teaching church. And as a young kid, I didn't really get that. I'm like, don't they all teach the Bible?
Right.
But she was like, no, I want them to be able to exegete and break it down. And like every pastor doesn't do that well.
Right.
So I remember we went to great teaching churches. I still had never really heard the word discipleship, either from a pulpit or from a youth ministry.
Okay.
Not to the extent of how we think about it. So college years, I went off the deep end. I got heavily involved in doing drugs, selling drugs, drinking way too much, some of everything. And I didn't lose my faith, but I definitely was a terrible witness.
Okay.
And my girlfriend at the time, was an atheist. I couldn't say much to her because I was barely a Christian myself. Fast forwarding, when I'm out of college, I'm in Chicago. God's pulling me back to him. So because I knew him at a young age, I knew this feeling. I knew this urge.
Right.
But I didn't know what to do, because once again, I wasn't discipled. I didn't really have Christian friends. I had one at this point. So we start going to a church. Then we're kind of church hopping back and forth between these two churches we've heard about. And eventually I couldn't ignore God anymore.
Right.
So this kind of connects with the other part. Is, so my mom always sent me these books, and I never read them because I was too busy doing worldly stuff.
Right.
The first book I pick up out the closet one day, just randomly, is The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel.
Good book.
Yeah. And I had never heard of apologetics. I wasn't looking for it specifically. I just wanted to just read something.
Okay.
And just the way I think is very logical, and that just connected with me. So I kind of was self-taught, and then I went and got some more formal training, and then most recently I got my master's in apologetics.
Wow.
So in there before all of that, actually, my wife, and we have a testimony video on my YouTube page, how she got saved, because it was kind of miraculous, and it wasn't my apologetic arguments or any of that, because I didn't know any at the time. God did that, and he did it in an amazing way. So that's how all those things converge, and here we are.
Good. Well, I definitely think somebody should listen to that testimony page. Those are really powerful, especially when you think about what you do for a living as an apologist. You're always defending the faith, but nobody can really take away from your testimony, right? So you could be the best trained apologist in the world, but no matter what, you come at me if I'm not trained, you can't deny my experience. This is my experience. So I think those are really powerful. So you said you were about 25 when you first heard the word discipleship or disciple making. What was that experience?
So when that church that we finally landed on, New Life Covenant Southeast, Pastor John Hanna, I served there for 13 years, eventually becoming pastor of education. But prior to that, I was a minister. I was in all the teaching arenas, so to speak. And what I started out doing was serving with our youth ministry with the teenagers. And all I wanted to do was serve. I had never served in a church before. All the churches I've been to, I never did anything there. So I started out just kind of tutoring kids with school. Well, then the guy who kind of first discipled me, and I don't even think he even said it that way, he just did it.
Yeah.
Pastor T, who eventually married my wife and I, he just kind of took me under his wing. And let me be clear too, I was not squeaky clean. I was still kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I was still doing some stuff I shouldn't have been doing, especially working with teens. And I'm talking about as far as my external life is with drugs and getting high and stuff like that. It was toning down, but I was still doing some of that. And he didn't kick me out. He just kept showing me what I should be. Discipleship's a process. And he did that with the teens. I was his right-hand man. He did that with me. Until I finally, he didn't tell me to stop or quit or stop that or I decided to stop, and I prayed and God helped me to stop. And then I did. Then he leaves and goes to New Zealand, and pastor puts me in charge of the youth. So now I'm the youth leader.
Wow.
No training except for that period of discipleship. The other part, and I give Pastor Hannah so much credit because he didn't have to do this. I used to just go to the office and just walk in his office and just start talking. And he graciously allowed me to do that. And he's a busy man. He wasn't as busy then as he is now, but he discipled me. And then there was another man who really, really discipled me named Pastor Tim, who was his right-hand man, who is like Bible nerd, learned the Bible in jail, but can break it down better than anybody that I've yet to meet.
Right.
Now he is who I call my main disciple maker, and he took me under his wing and showed me how to actually study the Bible.
Wow.
And once again, he didn't say, "Hey, I'm going to make you my disciple. I'm going to disciple you." Actually, I went to him one day and I said, he'd already been doing it, but I was like, "I want to make it official. You're not allowed to get rid of me." And basically told him, like, I can't do this without you. When some of the disciples, broad sense, walked away from Jesus, and Jesus asked, "Are you guys going to leave too?" And Peter said, "Where are we going to go?" And that's kind of how I felt. Like, I don't know anywhere else to go. I don't know anyone else who's shown me what you've already shown me.
Right.
And he's, to this day, he's still pouring into me. And that's the journey of me being discipled. And I've discipled, I don't know how many young men in the same way.
That's awesome. How many years now has it been since you and this relationship began?
Man, that was 2006.
Okay.
Maybe 2005.
Yeah.
Man, it's not so 15, 16 years. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I have a similar experience when I became a Christian. The pastor who led me to the Lord spent the next 18 months.
Wow.
We would meet weekly and I didn't work at the church. I had a regular job at the time, and I would call him at all hours of the day and night. And I would say things like, "Hey, there's this guy, I'm talking to him about Jesus, and he asked a question I don't have the answer. What do I say? And he'd be like, look up this passage. Let me explain it to you real quick. And then I would regurgitate whatever I could grab in that 30 seconds. So there aren't enough pastors who are doing it. We should celebrate those men who are
Absolutely.
out there making disciples, because that's what we're called to do. And I really love that.
Absolutely.
So let me pick your now you got a master's. Congratulations. Let's pick your brain for a couple minutes here. Hope Builders Ministries, we use a 1-on-3 disciple making model, and our background and our foundation for it is what we see Jesus spending some special time with Peter, James, and John. So why do you think this would be an effective method of making disciples in your community, or do you think it is?
I do, and I don't question any of Jesus's tactics. So that's first and foremost. I think it's also, even as you say 1-on-3, even if we take the whole 12.
Yeah.
And I've said this to pastors, I've said this at conferences and everything else. If Jesus could only handle 12, we gotta lower the bar. I can probably take 2. Yeah. But I think and especially when I was doing youth ministry a lot, it's so effective because not just you pouring into them,
right,
but they hold each other accountable. And we see later more so with Paul and Peter in Galatians 2, where Paul checks Peter, and we see even Peter and John in the Gospels get into some things. But I think it's important to see that, for example, I have 2 girls. It doesn't matter, 2 girls, just 2 kids. One of them's going to tell on the other one. So this is why conspiracy theories don't work, by the way, because somebody's going to tell on the other one. Somebody's going to snitch. Yeah. I have a friend who's a homicide detective, and it's like, look, this is evidence for the gospel too. This is evidence for Christianity, because people don't hold on to lies that long.
Right.
Somebody's going to give up the lie. So if the resurrection was a lie, if they made it up, somebody would have told.
Right.
And that's great evidence for it being true. But anyway, I think the not just the fact of you pouring your life into them, but they pour into each other, because we all have different gifts. We all have different focuses and abilities. And I think that is important to recognize. Mm-hmm. The other thing is the 12, Judas was in the 12, right? Yep. So it doesn't mean just because they're close to you that they're all getting it the same way. Right. Peter was special in many ways. He was very extreme, sometimes too extreme. 1 minute he's like, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, and the next minute you're Satan. Like, what? Yeah. What just happened? But Peter's loyalty never wavered. It was never in question.
Okay.
There's some who I've discipled who, this is the hard part of disciple making, because when you're really disciple making, especially with me, with young people, they become like my kids. When your kids do things that are not just sin or not just against God, it can become personal or feel personal, even though it's not. Mm-hmm. But you really love them that way. And so it makes sense to take those relationships seriously and feel that pain and feel that angst. I've had young people I'm discipling and get a phone call, oh man, I got so-and-so pregnant. And I'm like, what were you thinking? I've had to write,
You sound like a dad.
I know. I feel like it too. They come over, they'll spend the weekend here. I go to the grocery store, and by the end of the weekend, there's no food left. I'm like, man. So real disciple making requires a lot of you, not just of your time, but of your heart, right, of your energy, of your emotions. So to pour your life into 3 takes a lot.
It does.
And that's why I think your method is great. And I think people listening need to understand, as great as it is, it's not for the faint of heart. No, it's not. I'll say it like that.
When I first joined Hope Builders Ministry, I think it was probably my ego more than anything else. I kept thinking, I'll train 3, I'll move on, I'll train 3 more, I'll move on. All of a sudden, Mike's going to train 10,000 men. But what I've learned over time is you don't just walk away after you're done with the lessons. It's really about a commitment and a relationship between myself and them. And I learned as much about being a disciple as I'm teaching the lessons, as I'm, like they're getting some, I'm getting more, like constantly keeping me humble, constantly challenging me to grow. So I appreciate that, especially that part of taking it personal. I think, the question that I asked another pastor yesterday was, what are some of the obstacles that prevent pastors or church leaders from focusing on disciple making? And obviously the first one that came to mind for him was time, right? Here's a bivocational pastor. He's got a wife. He's actually traveling back and forth between North Carolina and Wisconsin, kind of helping out at 2 churches. He's got a big job and he's a district manager for a retailer. So he's got all these heavy responsibilities. So time for him is number one. And we didn't even get into the pain, right? But what would you think are some of the obstacles that prevent pastors from focusing on this?
Time. For sure. That is, look, we only have 24 hours a day, all of us. I know people like to be superhuman. I didn't sleep great last night, not for any specific reason, just sometimes I don't. And, but we all need sleep. I know that the common thing is, some people say, I don't need sleep, and they'll try to be tough about it. But yeah, you do. Even Jesus slept. So time is one obstacle for sure. But I learned a very, very valuable lesson very early on because I asked Nick and another friend of ours, Matt, who to me on a practical peer-to-peer level, they have shown and taught me more about discipleship than I could ever read in a book. Okay. Just watching how they do it. Matt's another one. He's had so many people live with him that are not his, that I'm like, it's crazy, but it's a beautiful thing. But I was at Matt's house and I literally asked him, I was like, how do you, and I didn't have kids at the time. It was just me and my wife. I'm like, how do you, like, I got my job time, I got my ministry time, I got my wife time. And he said, don't look at them as different things. You disciple wherever you are, they are. Mm-hmm. So once I learned that, it drastically changed everything. So now let's say I have a young person I'm discipling and they're here. Whatever I was going to do that day, whatever me and my family was going to do that day, they're just doing it with me. They're just, as I go, you, like Jesus said, make disciples as you go. So whatever you're doing. So sometimes they've been here and we might just be playing video games. We might be watching a football game. If I'm going to dinner with my family, they're coming too. If I need to go to the grocery store, they're just coming with me. It's not scripted. I don't think everything Jesus did, well, maybe for Jesus it was he knew ahead of time what he was going to do, but the disciples definitely didn't. Right. They were just like, we're going this direction and some stuff's going to happen on the way. We don't know what it is, but something's going to happen. Yeah. There's been times where we were out at dinner, matter of fact, and some guy approached us on the street and said something that was very antagonistic to Christianity, just randomly for no reason. Hey, it's a teachable moment. We talk all the time about teachable moments where it wasn't something you planned, but now that it happened, let's talk about it, right? When they come to the house, it's not, hey, sit down, we're gonna do Bible study the whole weekend. And right. No, it's just, I want you to see what life is like as a man of God, as a Christian man of God. What is it like with my family? So for just being perfectly open and honest, and that's the other thing that's important. But let's say they're here and my wife and I get into an argument. Okay. They need to see all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're bad sometimes in church. Well, in church, we sugarcoat, right? Yeah. It's easy to put the suit on and try to appear as though my walk with God is perfect. But you're not actually helping anybody by doing that. You're just making it look unattainable. Mm-hmm. So yeah. That makes them get further discouraged, not encouraged. So that's one obstacle. Now, let me be careful here. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but I'll say Allegiance to programs and systems
Okay.
is an obstacle.
Okay.
It doesn't mean programs and systems are bad necessarily, but if they overshadow your ability, or if they are the reason you're giving for why you can't be more intentional in disciple making, that's a problem.
Right.
Um, and it's predominantly a Western problem, right? In the Western church. I know you do so much stuff in Africa. They're not thinking about a men's conference and women's ministry, and like, they're just trying to stay alive for a lot of times and trying to preach the gospel. I have a pastor in Pakistan I've been kind of sharing with and ministering to over this last year. And he'll send me these pictures of stuff they're doing and the challenges in a mostly Islamic country.
Yep.
They're not thinking about ecclesiology and church structure and this program, that program. And so we've kind of, at least in the West, created a problem that doesn't necessarily need to even be one.
Mm-hmm.
That's the irony of the whole thing. When we switched to the house church, it was just like, man, no more meetings, no more bureaucracy, no more budget plans. And look, if a church can make all these things work and be focused on the disciple making, hey, more power to you.
Right.
I just think it's so much harder. So even when we want to go serve the homeless, I just text Nick and then we say, yeah. And then we put it in the group meet and then we go.
That's awesome.
That's the whole meeting.
Yeah.
The thing, I know everybody's not, but I'm a fan of Francis Chan, and we're actually reading Letters to the Church in our church right now. Some people who don't like him are pastors who are stuck in these particular mindsets. But he pushes back on that, so I understand why. But look, what is not a necessity and what is a necessity? Discipleship is a necessity. That's a requirement. Yeah. It's called the Great Commission, right? Fellowship is a necessity. It's not optional. Community is not optional. Community impact, I would even say, is not optional. Definitely doctrine. We got to be solid on doctrine. But outside of those things, everything else is kind of up for grabs. You can do it or you cannot do it, but what you must do are these things, and that's not even an exhaustive list. So I think some of the obstacles are things we've created for ourselves that we didn't necessarily need to create.
Yeah. When we do house church, one of the things that I've really learned to appreciate is there is no performance. Last week ours is more, it's very much a dialogue, right? So here's what we're covering. Let's come to it. This last week, we decided that based on some things that we had seen in the news and some personal conversations with the other families, we focused on lying. Like what does the Bible say about lying in the face of fear? And really, it was I was overwhelmed with watching the Holy Spirit through the Word of God change us from, we started here and we all ended here going, yeah, we can't do that. We got to change our attitude. And to me, that's the benefit of being in that smaller, I don't have to put on I got an 18-minute message or 25-minute message, and the worship team's got to do 4 songs today. There's somebody here. The greeter didn't make it in. Who's in the sound booth, right? When we went and joined you guys, Nick that day was just like, okay, let's sit down. He pulled out his computer, set it up to the TV. We all sat on the TV, and he had his PowerPoint and talked. And I was like, that was before we did the house church. And I was like, this is what I want my kids to experience. Yeah. Because glitches and people coming in late and loud kids, and that's what it means to be a Christian. It's not like you said. I always look at it like I tell people when we're talking about getting ready for marriage counseling, a lot of times I'll say, okay, who's your favorite couple? And they'll always talk about somebody, like for me and my wife, it was her parents. They've been married 60 years. And wow. When I first got married, I kept thinking, I am nothing like them. But what I saw was the finished product. I never saw the fights, the financial, the sick, all the things that took them from A to Z. I only wanted the end product. I didn't want to go through the work of becoming like them. Well, 15 years in, we're looking more and more like them after we've been through our trials and we've been through our struggles and our fights and our healing and forgiveness. And I think that's a lot of what disciple making looks like.
Man, you said so much right there, and absolutely is. So we're going through Romans right now,
Okay.
and just like you, it took us a year. We did Genesis last year. It took us a year,
Yeah.
because we go verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We don't skip anything. If it's in there, we're teaching it. In fact, my week fell on me to teach Genesis, I think 38, which is Judah and Tamar. Not a very encouraging story. Uh, I've never, as I think about it, or as I was thinking about it, I've never been to a church service where they preach from that chapter. Like,
It's not in the top 10, huh?
it's not at all. And even that whole week, I'm like, God, you got to give me something. I don't know what to say to encourage through this.
Right.
But what happened was so beautiful, because I studied enough, and I got all the kind of background and details. But the beauty of house church is it's not on just the preacher.
Mm-mm.
When we teach, we're kind of setting the stage, and then everyone gets to engage in the text. Our name of our church is Engage.
Right.
We want to engage God, engage each other, and engage our neighbor. So yes, I'm going to study, Nick's going to study, we're going to do the leading, we're going to do the heavy lifting, the background, all that. But even if I've studied the whole week, right? And on Sunday, without a question, somebody will say something that I did not see in that entire week.
Right.
I'm like, man, that's awesome. I didn't see that. And a lot of times that's the point that everybody walks away remembering, not my week long of study, right? Which is fine. It's beautiful, because regardless of your degree or your background or your time as a Christian, it's not, no one has a monopoly on scripture.
No.
So
I love it. I think it's John 6 and Isaiah, where it talks about in those days, God will teach the people himself. And that's what that feels like to me. I love it when I spend all week. My wife says, you spend an awful lot of time putting together this conversation. And I'm like, well, it's really for me, because I don't really know anything and I need to learn it. And I want to be closer to God through learning it, and helping bring that out of people in conversation is exciting to me. But then when I see the light bulb go off and they'll say something, I'll be like, how did I miss that? Like, it's so, wow. And then I love it. I think that's, and it makes me excited, and it humbles me. I think one of the greatest things, like we do a nightly study with our kids, and my kids will oftentimes point something out or ask a question of the text that I never got. And I think it's awesome to see a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old teach me. So
it is.
Yeah. So we've all, the church in America, let's focus on the Western church, because that's who we're really talking today. We've been through a lot in the last 12 months. I love what you said about there are certain things that are, they're requirements, right? And, going and making disciples it's a command. Fellowship, it's not negotiable. What are some things that you've learned over the last 12, 15 months of COVID, or are learning now? Because I feel like a lot of churches are either still afraid to open the doors, or some are opening the doors, and what they're seeing is discouragement. There's a lack of hope. There's a lot of division still. What are some things that you're learning?
Well, one, kind of to piggyback on that last question, is some people are very committed to their way of doing church. Almost at the beginning of this, when I first was really kind of starting on YouTube last year, which I pretty much just did because I couldn't go speak live. Me, Nick, and another pastor did something on, this is a time to re-examine your ecclesiology or your way of doing church. And so my fear was, and still is to a certain degree, any church or pastor that didn't, not to say you changed everything, but if you didn't take a hard look at why you do what you do and how you do what you do over this last year, I think you miss a God-given opportunity. Doesn't mean you had to blow it all up and start over from scratch, but just, we all were stuck in the house. We all had time to think in ways that we didn't have time before. We were so busy in doing so many things, especially at the beginning. If you didn't use that time well, and you're like, man, I just can't wait to get back, I think you missed an opportunity. it's just, that's a, I don't want to call it a gift because COVID was bad, but time is a gift. I'll say it like that. Time to think, time to spend with God for whatever reason or however it comes about, that was a gift. So that's one thing. The local fellowship of believers is one of the most important components of the body of Christ. Now, that sounds obvious, but when I say that, I don't mean, okay, all these people come into a building on Sunday.
Yeah.
And then what I mean is, like, one thing that's unique in a house church is if you're not there, everyone knows you're missed. You're clearly not present,
Right.
because there's only 20, 25 people. Well, what a person adds to that fellowship is it's not inconsequential. It's meaningful. It's like, no, we want you here. We need you here. You add something.
Right.
You add something to me as the preacher or pastor or whatever. Your presence adds something to me.
Yeah.
And when I say your, like, I can name your name. Right. Yeah. And when you aren't there specifically, because people will think, well, who's going to miss me if I'm not here? We all will. Yeah. In this context, because we all know you and see you in that context. So I've just learned that and grown to appreciate the fellowship. Now that we're back kind of live fellowshipping, it's so awesome. Yeah. To not be on Zoom.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I have a friend who's a pastor in Tennessee, in Kingsport. And one of the things he called me, we were tracking together through COVID. He said, one of the things that they learned was just what you pointed out, that there was one man in the church who was a gifted teacher. And what he found was, by not gathering together, he was dying. The gift that the Lord gave him to teach others, he couldn't use because others weren't there to learn. And he was slowly withering over the whole COVID thing. So regardless of what your gifting is, you draw it out of me by being there, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. And I personally think that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned last year. We were fortunate. We had the house church. 25 of us every weekend would meet, and we wouldn't have made it through COVID last year without the fellowship of believers. When there was that 2-week window in Chicago where everything was locked down, everyone was stay home, don't go out. Right. We turned those 2 weeks into a daily Zoom Bible study. Like that was only 2 weeks that we were shut down. We literally did like you. We went through James, and then we were like, well, let's just keep going. We went through Philippians, and we were like, word, and literally like hours of just talking about the word of God, praying together. We tried to do the Zoom sing along. It didn't work so well. But it was that we, instead of feeling more distant from one another, that opportunity drew us closer together. Now, a year later, we're in Dixon. We're 2 hours west. One of the families moved to Texas. Everyone is kind of still in the other area. We still meet every Wednesday for a Bible study. We're going through the Gospel of John together. We've been doing that for like the last 6 months. We just said we're going to stay together as a body as much as we can. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the big topics in America always has been church growth, right? I've been a Christian for 15 years. How do we grow the church has been like the mantra, right? I've often heard pastors say, well, Jesus said he would grow the church. I'm to go and make disciples, right? And I absolutely believe that's true. But Barna released in an interesting quote the other day that I saw that the most common way the church grows today is through church swapping. So Christians will go to this church, they'll get mad at the pastor or somebody else in the congregation. Maybe they don't enjoy the worship that's taking place, and so they bounce along to another local church. But that's not how it was in the beginning, and you're an apologist. So church, the gospel is usually spread through some type of difficulty, right? There's been martyrdom, there's been wars, there's been poverty, sickness. How can Hope Builders Ministry come alongside the local church to equip Christians to advance the gospel through the Great Commission without being a burden to the pastor?
Man, great question. And first thing, you guys provide disciple making resources. So now churches don't have to create those resources; they have to utilize them, implement those things, and implement those practices that you all have taught. And once again, a perfect example. You're not trying to take over someone's church. You're trying to be a resource to them.
Mhm.
We all have niches, lanes of expertise or skill, and you guys, what you do provides much needed resource or set of resources or systems that churches can implement. But you're very right that church swapping wouldn't make sense in the first century context. It was just whatever house was kind of local and central to you, and that was kind of even a carryover from their Jewish culture, because the way a synagogue would work is once there's 10 men in a certain area or community, that's a synagogue, and once it's more, you put another synagogue. So they were used to this close-knit idea of community worship and fellowship, where as the church started, and even those 3,000 get saved, 5,000 get saved, they didn't build this huge stadium to seat everybody and have 4 services every Sunday. They were in different houses, as Paul writes, in the house of this person's house, and even the upper room. And so part of it was logistical, but I think even in that, once again, God doesn't do anything just to do it. He's intentional, he's strategic. And so even when Christ came, it was strategic. And the persecution would have prevented a building a big church, because it wouldn't make sense. You're going to show everybody where you're worshiping.
Let's put a cross up. Come get us. Yeah.
So that wouldn't make sense. But guess what happened? The church went global by little house fellowships. It went from Jerusalem to Rome and beyond this way.
Yeah.
So I try to help people see that the Acts 2 model, it wasn't just, that's all they could do. No, it's what made the most sense to do. And most importantly, regardless of any of the current abilities, that was effective in the face of persecution. I was talking with a pastor earlier about how Nero was using Christians as human torches.
Right.
In that context, Christianity kept spreading. They stayed committed to it through persecution that we can't even begin to comprehend.
Right.
And so there's really no comparison to the struggles that they face versus what we face, especially in the West. I think most, if not all, research shows that the most effective way to evangelize is a new church plant.
Okay.
That when a new church is starting, they are more likely to get more non-Christians than a church that's been around for 50 years is likely to get new believers. Not that it doesn't happen or can't happen, but this requires pastors and church leadership to get out of their own way.
You've used that like twice now, just like
I know.
Get out of your own way.
I'm trying to be.
There's a message here.
It is. So I'll say this. This is just me, and this is not for everyone. This is just how we've done it. Like Nick and I, we don't take a salary from the church. Not that that's wrong, and I'm not against that. But once that's the case, it's harder to release.
Yeah.
Because once finances are tied to certain things, not just a senior pastor, you got other staff and people. And I get, you should pay people what they're worth. You should pay people for their time. But that's a model that we're used to. It's not a mandatory model. So once you do have that, it's you're less likely to take some of your people, aka some of your income, and give it away as a church plant. Not that it doesn't happen, and it does happen often. I'm just saying, if we change the structure, it would happen a lot more, because there would be nothing to hold on to. So we have to get to the point of understanding that people belong to God, not to us, not to our church, not to our ministry,
Right.
not to our desires. They are God's. And once they're saved, we should be looking like, okay, I'm going to disciple you so that you can go do what God needs you to do, wherever he wants you to do it. And we're going to support you to the best of our ability. Like that mindset should undergird everything. And I hear too many, not everyone, and this is not, I wouldn't even say a lot necessarily. I hope it's not a lot. Talk about my members, my people, not yours.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny, and that'll lead us to the question about multiplication. It's funny because if somebody's listening to you speak, it goes to that parenting role, right? We raise our children and we hold on to them so tightly for a season to train them and equip them so that when they go out, because eventually they got to move out, right? At some point, I know you have little girls, I have grown children. At some point, those kids need to go out. And we have grandchildren now. So my children have multiplied. And they wouldn't have been able to multiply if I held on to them. That's what disciple making is supposed to be. So, help me to understand multiplication. So you just described beautifully the synagogue. 10 families get together. After a while, they have to go and multiply. What does that equipping looks like? Because, in my mind, guys like that I'm attracted to work with, guys that are from the city of Chicago that they have a background more like ours, maybe not the master's degree, but they have a background of growing up in the city, being exposed to the violence, to the crime, to the poverty. How does a guy like that answer the call? Because God may have called guys like that to open up their home, be hospitable, be a place of worship. How does that work? Where does that guy develop the confidence to do something like that?
Yeah, from good leadership and good disciple making under somebody who is not only not threatened by what may be in them, but is desiring to pull out whatever's in them,
right,
for God's use. So it's the mindset is different, that I'm discipling somebody specifically for them, not to remain under me.
Right.
There's two quotes by Francis Chan in Letters to the Church. He said, many pastors expect their members to sit under their teachings till they die, rather than training them to leave and shepherd others.
Yeah.
He says, I now want to know I can drop off any member of my church in a city, and that person could grow in Jesus, make disciples, and start a church. You want to know, as you said, when you raise your kids, you want to know that they have their own relationship with God and that they can self-sustain. Right. I was saying, another great thing about another way I've been able to use this pandemic to our advantage is I've had so much more time to do intentional Bible study with my girls because they've been at home a lot. And so we just finished walking through John. We're walking through Acts right now. I'm like, the best thing I can do as a parent, as their father, the best protection I can ever give them is making sure that when they leave here, that they have a true and personal relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
That's the best thing I can ever do. Because even if they're like me and they fall off, there's something to come back to.
Yeah.
And so starting at age 7 and 10, I'm discipling them now. And even before this, that they have such a head start on where I was.
Yeah.
And with the house church, they're growing up seeing community, gospel-centered community. They see that as a normal thing. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's all we know. And it's not all they know, but it's what they have known and come to know. So for them, this won't be a challenge not that they won't have challenges, but this won't be a challenge for them in the future. They're going to understand, well, this is what church looks like. And this is what the word means. And this is what I've been teaching my oldest apologetics since she was 8, I believe.
I remember.
She's
tough.
Yeah. And she came to faith based on evidence, and she made her own confession. But now, for example, we were on Sunday praying in front of a Buddhist temple, and she's like, "What is Buddhism?" And I could explain it to her. I'm not going to hide that.
Nope.
One thing we do is detrimental, that when kids go off to college, and that's the first time they hear about Islam or Buddhism or atheism or any other isms, now they feel like the wolves pulled over their eyes, and that's when they really start questioning and doubting.
Right.
But I've already exposed her to atheisms and
Mhm.
Buddhism and other isms, because it's not a threat.
Yeah.
And so, I don't remember what the original question was. I got off on a
We were
tangent.
just talking about multiplication. Yeah. How do you
Oh,
get, yeah.
so I was looking for this book that Francis Chan wrote called Multiply, but multiplication versus just addition is, you're trying to, so Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. We're trying to reproduce Christ in somebody,
Right.
to the point that it is so ingrained that they can't help but give that out to people that they come in contact with and disciple.
Mhm.
So we're intentional about why we're discipling. Nick says all the time, like, I'm not gonna tell you, you don't have to come to me and ask permission to do something that's gonna help the kingdom.
Mm.
A lot of times in churches, especially as they get bigger, if you do something outside of church and you're ministering somewhere,
Yeah.
you get in trouble for that.
Do,
Um,
right?
yeah,
Sad.
it sounds funny, but
True.
uh,
Yeah.
it happens. And so you have to follow the orders, you have to follow the structure. Now, I believe in order, I believe in structure, but I also believe that if there's something I'm doing that's helping the kingdom of God,
Yep.
that's always right to do. That's always the right thing to do.
Right.
And then we should come back on Sunday and celebrate with you what you did.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to work. So I'm not trying to hold on. We're not trying to hold on to anybody. We're
Right.
trying to train up and help you where we can, support you where we can,
Yeah.
financially, prayerfully, and then as more come in, we do the same thing. When wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah. I talk wash, rinse, repeat. I like that.
I
We,
don't really have to do a lot of that.
yeah, well, I'm getting there myself. Yeah. Except for I don't look good bald. I'm doing a study on Deuteronomy chapter, or just the book of Deuteronomy, and what you just described was Moses in the first 3 chapters. And
Mm,
here's this man who knows his time is coming to an end, and he's giving the testimony of Israel to their children who are about to enter into the promised land. And that's what you're doing with your daughters. When you're teaching them the word of God, you're giving them their own faith, but you're giving it to them based on, this is the experience that we've just gone through. You're going to experience hardship, you're going to experience false gods, you're going to experience failure, but God is faithful in all of those things. And I love that you're making little disciples in your home, because I do think a lot, for me, um, my family didn't go to church as a kid. And when I went to church and asked questions and they wouldn't answer, it bothered me. And it actually caused me to have that doubt at a very early age, which is why I walked away from Christ as a child. But anyways, I just think that's really powerful what you're doing there.
amen.
So I've had a chance to come and worship with you guys, but if somebody were listening to this and they live in the Chicago area and they wanted to worship with you, how would they connect? What would they experience walking through the door? Because it's a little intimidating to walk into somebody's house. I remember when we pulled up in front of Nick's house, we sat out in the street and went, okay, is this the right house? And they had a sign on the door like, come on in. And we were like, is that really okay? And we didn't really know anybody there. It was just, I think it was just Nick and his family at that point, and the young man living with him. What would they experience if they came to worship with you?
I hope they would experience genuine love, and welcoming. We have welcomed people in that just were in the neighborhood, at his former place.
Mhm.
I would hope they'd experience love. I would hope they would be comfortable, and I think that is the experience that people would say they have.
Yeah.
We've had a couple new people join who found me through YouTube or Facebook, and just, I think, randomly heard me talk about a house church, and
Right.
just message me offline like, hey, I'm in Chicago. Can we come check? And it's like, when something like that happens, I tell Nick, hey, so and so, and it's very intentional. It's not just oh, we had 10 visitors today, stand, wave your hand, and you're just kind of a number.
Right.
We know the name and probably look at the profile of whoever's coming because
Right.
it's a house church, you know?
Yeah. Right.
We want to protect our children. And
Amen.
even when we have talked about this too, and I haven't been able to do it in a while because of COVID, but I do prison ministry. So I teach in jail regularly. And when brothers get out, we've talked about, hey, they need a place to worship. We want to welcome them in. We don't want to treat them like they're past.
Mm-hmm.
But we will go. I mean, like I said, we haven't had a chance because of COVID and the jails are shut down to visitors. But eventually, I'm assuming some of them, when they get out, they will come.
Yeah.
And we want to welcome, but we're very intentional. We want to get to know people for a variety of reasons, and so we're genuinely interested in getting to know the person, their story, their experiences,
Right.
their gifts. And it's been beautiful to watch recently in the last 6 months, I'll say, how especially some of our young people, these young kids fresh out of Moody and fresh out of college, are coming. And we're a very organically multi-ethnic, multi-generational church. It just kind of happened that way.
That's cool.
And I think the young can learn from the older and vice versa. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's just a beautiful picture of when you're submitted to God, what he can bring together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We didn't send out any invites. I mean, we've told people what we do, but
Right.
yeah.
It's word of mouth, right? Well, how would they find you? Is there a website, Facebook? How do they connect with Engage?
Yes, we are working on a website, but right now, I think just if you go on Facebook, Engage Community Church is the name of the church, Engage Community Church. You should be able to find it there, and you can connect with us. I would also say you just can reach out to myself or Nick directly. His name is Nick Rivera. My name is Alex McElroy. Feel free to Facebook message, Messenger, whatever it is, send a request or ask questions. We're open. Yeah.
Good. Now, as a father of many children myself, my wife is always looking for apologetics resources to get our kids a defense of the faith. So how would they find you in your YouTube channel? What's all that?
Yes. And let me say this too. So I wrote a book few years ago called Blueprint for Bible Basics. It's mainly directed from my time in youth ministry with teenagers. So it's not purely apologetic, but it gives the basics, as the title indicates. I need to do a volume 2, but it has a study guide in it. So it's only $10. You can get it from my website, alexrmcelroy.com. That's a great resource to walk through with your young people, or if you have a church and with a youth ministry, you can walk through with them. My YouTube channel is Relentless Pursuit of Purpose. So just go to YouTube and Relentless Pursuit of Purpose. I have a blog by the same name, which I haven't done too much with lately because I've been busy doing videos.
Yeah.
We do, like I said, apologetics workshops. So if you go to proofforthetruth.org, you can look more into those, and you can contact me directly, where we come in and deliver, let's say, maybe 3 hours, including Q&A.
Yep.
On whatever topic you feel is most necessary for your church, your youth ministry, or the entire church. Yeah, I mean, the YouTube's great because the content's there, it stays there. I'm trying to address a lot of different issues. I bring on some great, amazing guests. I've just been privileged to kind of know the leading apologists of our day. So I try to bring them before the people and just engage in lively discussion, sometimes controversial topics, but that's good too. And
right.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I appreciate your time today. And man, I just keep praying for you guys in your ministry. I know that you're making a big impact in Chicago. Chicago is going through quite a bit. The violence, the politics, the poverty, the just all the things that are going on over there, the gospel needs to be shared, and you guys are doing a great job of being the hands and feet of Christ. I love when Nick posts stuff on Facebook about prayer walks or just all the different things that he does. I mean, I see him a lot more than I see your posts. So I'm going to have to figure that piece out on the algorithm. But I do know that you are out there teaching, and that's important, and we need that. So God bless you.
Amen. God bless you too. And I thank you for this opportunity. And I pray that you will be blessed in your new location to, to also be those hands and feet right there. So